Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq, with daily insight on the Nasdaq-100 Index, or the NDX, which is made up of 100 of the largest domestic and international non-financial innovative companies listed right here on the Nasdaq stock market. The NDX has been the barometer for U.S. large cap growth and also one of the best performing indexes over the last decade and a half, not to mention one of the most liquid index ecosystems in the world. Joining us this Friday afternoon, we have Ben Jones, Product Development Specialist with Nasdaq Index Research, to take a look at some Nasdaq 100 levels. Ben, great to see you. Happy Friday, and let's dive right into it with an overview of the Nasdaq 100.
Yeah, when we think about the Nasdaq 100, right, it's important to think about kind of tech and innovation and growth. And today, basically, the top 10 positions or components of the Nasdaq 100, rather, account for about 58% of the index. Six of which are classified as technology names, and these are companies that are leading the charge at the cutting edge of changing society, building better networks, all sorts of things. But what's also important to remember is that within the top 10 of the Nasdaq 100, there are also just names that are specific to technology, right? Names like PayPal, which are classified as industrials, or Tesla as consumer goods. They all use some sort of technology and are very innovative, but from a industry classification, they aren't labeled as technology. So I think that's important to remember. But at the end of the day, we're in the age and the era of mega tech, and these names, like Amazon, like Apple, like Alphabet, are really changing the future. And and they're quite large too, right? They're definitely names that have, at least in 2019, as a group, about $1 trillion in total revenue. And today they have about an average market cap of about 887 billion, and that's the top 10 of the Nasdaq 100. But I think the point today, which I want to hit upon, is that they weren't always this large, right? They weren't always in the top 10 of the Nasdaq 100. And I think that's why it's important to take a look at the next generation of the Nasdaq 100, the Nasdaq Next Generation 100.
Yeah, and let's talk about that. It's really interesting because many of the companies in the Nasdaq 100 could have been constituents with the NGX.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what we see. So the Nasdaq Next Generation 100 Index is an index that is designed to measure the performance of basically the next generation of Nasdaq listed non-financial companies, right? And so this index is comprised of essentially the 100 largest companies outside of the Nasdaq 100, right? So think the next generation. And so if we look at the Nasdaq 100 index today, which again is looking at the 100 largest Nasdaq listed non-financial companies, we see that about 35 of the current constituents in the Nasdaq 100 were members of this next generation index, looking at the back test of the index. And so we can see that these names that I say are comprised and make up the Nasdaq 100 were at one point in time the next generation, right, of those smaller size companies listed on the Nasdaq Stock Exchange.
All right, and to wrap up here, let's talk about comparison, Nasdaq 100 versus Nasdaq NextGen.
So if we look at the recent performance, right, it makes sense when we've seen just large growth, large cap technology really lead the charge and outperform this year as well as the past 3 to 4 years. So as a whole, the Nasdaq 100 has outperformed, let's say, the Next Generation 100 going back to the about the end of 2010. But there have been periods where we have seen the Next Generation 100 outperform, and those are periods where we really saw strength in, let's say, the mid-cap growth space, right? And that's in that period between 2013 and 14. If we look at the two indexes against, let's say, the S&P 500, so Nasdaq 100 as well as the Nasdaq Next Generation 100, both of those have outperformed actually the S&P 500 over this time period, right? Looking since about December 31st, 2010. So you do see positive performance. You have seen relative outperformance as well over this time period, favoring these two indexes, and even the Next Generation 100, which is again comprised of some of those smaller size mid-cap growth companies compared to the Nasdaq 100. You can access this particular index. It is tracked via an ETF, and that's the Index Nasdaq NextGen 100 ETF, QQQJ, which was launched this past week.
All right, Ben, great stuff. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks.
Thank you.
And thanks for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.